Button sewing is a fine motor skill. And if you are not used to doing this, I strongly recommend that you pick the biggest button that is available to you just to make your life a little bit easier. If I have not already preached the sermon about making yourself a button jar, let me go ahead and preach this again now. I bought this particular jar of spices for a recipe that I made in high school. So we're talking 15 years ago. I know that because this particular jar, I don't buy this brand of spices, but it was the only one that was available and I needed this. It was ginger. So I needed ginger for this recipe that I was making and nobody had it at the time except for this particular brand. And this is not the brand of spices that I buy. But I thought it was a cool jar, and so I saved it because I'm a crow and I save shiny things. And ever since then, every time I buy a shirt or a jacket that comes with the little plastic baggie of buttons, I put the buttons in this jar so that I never have to hunt. If something pops off of one of my shirts, I never have to hunt for them. So I'm going to select a button. That's a pretty one. So, once you have your needle threaded, now it is time to sew on your button. There are two different methods of button sewing. The X method is fine. However, if you look at most of your shirts and jackets that have sewn on buttons, you'll find that they don't use the X method. They use the equal sign method. And that's what we're going to do because if the odds are most of you will only do any button sewing when you need to repair something that has popped off. So you've got a shirt that has lost a button and you've got to sew it back on. And so I'm going to teach you the equal sign method because that's the one that's going to very likely match the other buttons that are already on your shirt. So may I recommend that you sort of figure out where you want your button to go and then take your marker and mark through where one of the holes would be. Kind of tough to do. If you're not able to do it, as long as it's a washable marker, you could actually draw around where the button is going to go, just so that you know, in the event you have to stop the project, that you don't waste time trying to figure out where the button is going to go. Then, to get started, you want the right side of the fabric facing you for a button, and up through the very center point of your circle that you have drawn to mark where the button is supposed to go. There's my needle. You're going to bring up your needle with your thread and pull it all the way through until the knot catches on the wrong side. Okay? So now I'm going to bead my button onto my needle. So I'm just going to pick a hole, stick my needle through it, drop the button down. Boom, shakalaka. Okay. Now using my lines of demarcation, my marks that I made earlier, I really wish this would stay in focus. There we go. So using the marks that I made earlier, I'm going to line up the button in its correct position. And then I'm just going to take another stitch. I'm going to stick the needle back down and pull tight. Now my button has shifted in position slightly. That's okay. It probably will. So all I have to do is shift it back into the right spot. You could even use a little bit of fabric glue just to hold the button in the correct position. And now I'm going to come down and come back up. I went down through that buttonhole there. So I'm going to come back up through that one. Now this can be a little bit of trial and error as you sort of have to just stab at the back of the button until the needle finds the hole that it needs to go through. Takes a little bit. It doesn't even take practice. It just takes patience, honestly. Until, whoop, there it finally goes. Pull that up. Now, before you stick it back down again, check and make sure that your button is in the correct position, because from here on in, you won't be able to adjust it. I am happy with where my button is, so I'm going to drop the needle back down into hole number 4. Now, that's one. You need to do several of these for the button to stay on. This alone is not strong enough. I like to work in 3s, so I like to do it 3 times. Some people keep doing it until they run out of the length of thread that they cut. That's fine. You do need to save a little bit of thread for creating the yoke at the end, and I'll show you what that is. So I'm going to try to hold this as still as possible while I work. That was buttonhole number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'm coming up through 1 and 3, and I'm going down into 2 and 4, and I'm just going to repeat that 2 more times. I've done this once, so I'm going to do it 2 more times. Coming up through 1, down through 2, stabbed myself, great, going to bleed all over my project. Up through 3, gotta find 3, there it is. Down through 4, oopsie. Good, last time. Good. Now, I have got 3 stitches on each set of holes, making an equal sign. Flipping it over to the back, I've also got an equal sign going on, sort of. The last thing I need to do is create a yoke. So we don't want this super, super tight against our fabric. We actually need to give it a little bit of breathing room so that the piece of fabric from whatever I'm buttoning this to has some room to sit in there. Otherwise, I risk tearing the buttonhole on the shirt collar or whatever it is the button is doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my button sideways and peel back the fabric until I can see my stitches. And I'm going to stick my needle back up from the wrong side, but not through the button, like this. You see it? There it is. So it's on, my needle is now on the right side of the fabric, but it's still behind the button, like that. Good. And I'll pull it all the way through. And now I'm going to create a yoke. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap my thread around my stitches. I like 3s, so 1, 2, 3 times, and then pull it really, really tight. And what that does, I'll turn it and show you, is it creates a little bit of lift, just a little bit, so that there is some room behind the button. If you want to, you can be one of those people who just goes around and around and around until you just about run out of thread. That's totally fine. Just make sure that you are pulling tightly as you go, but not so tightly that you're causing your fabric to wrinkle. Okay. And take a look. And there I've got some serious lift going on there that probably actually is a little bit too much, but that's okay. So now, once I've made my yoke, I'm going to drop the needle back to the wrong side of the fabric. Make sure you can see this. Ow, I stabbed myself. There we go. So I'm going to drop my needle back to the wrong side of the fabric. I got a little tail in there from something that didn't get pulled tightly. That's not going to hurt anything. We're going to clip that away in just a moment, okay? In fact, just to keep you guys from getting distracted by it, I'm going to go ahead and clip away that loop. There we go. Okay, so now to finish off my button, I'm just going to do a lock stitch on the back of the button. So pick any spot, it doesn't really matter where, just as long as it's going to be hidden on the front by the button itself. You don't want to come like way out over here and do it because then you'll be able to see it. Okay, so just behind the button, anywhere you like, you're going to do a basic lock stitch. So I'm going to create 1 stitch by going down and up. Loop back around. There's 1 stitch. There you go. Do it again for 2. I like to work in 3s. So there's 1 stitch. Same exact spots going in and out the same holes. That's stitch number 2. And 1 more time, but this time I'm not going to tighten it just yet. That's going to be stitch number 3, but I'm going to take the tail of my thread and wrap it around the point of my needle. And I like 3s, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 times. Hold that in place with my thumbnail, pinch tightly, pull the thread nice and tight. And there I have my lock stitch for my buttonhole, and then I can clip away the excess thread with my scissors, like so. And voila! I have a button attached to my sewing sampler project. So that completes our sewing sampler, ladies and gentlemen. You began with a line of basting stitches. You did 2 lines of running stitches. You did a line of back stitching. And the last thing you did was attach a button to the front using the equal sign method. Once you have done all of these steps, then your sampler is complete and you can submit your pictures.